the life you were meant to live. There are lives that are lived loudly, and there are lives that are lived quietly. And then there are lives that were never truly lived at all. Not because of lack of talent, not because of lack of intelligence, not even because of lack of opportunity, but because of hesitation. Because somewhere along the way, a human being learned to doubt themselves more than they trusted their own potential. They learned to seek permission before acting, approval before moving, validation before believing, and without realizing it, they handed the steering wheel of their life to invisible forces, opinions, fears, expectations, and comfort. Consider this for a moment. Most people do not fail at their dreams. They simply never start. They wait. They prepare. They think. They overthink. They postpone. They tell themselves stories that sound responsible, logical, and mature. But beneath those stories is a quieter truth. Fear. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the polite fear, the socially acceptable fear, the fear that disguises itself as patience, humility, realism, or being practical. Suppose you had a dream that mattered deeply to you. Not a fantasy, but a calling. Something that keeps returning to your mind late at night when no one is watching. And suppose every time that dream tried to rise, something else whispered louder. What will people think? Who am I to try? I need to learn more first. It's not the right time. Others are better than me. I'll start when I feel confident. That whisper has stolen more lives than failure ever has. This audiobook is not about motivation. Motivation fades. This is about exposure. We are going to expose the silent chains that keep people trapped in ordinary lives they never consciously chose. The habits that look harmless, the beliefs that sound reasonable, the emotional patterns that feel familiar but quietly suffocate ambition. You may recognize yourself in these chapters, not because something is wrong with you, but because nothing ever taught you how these invisible forces operate. Consider how early this conditioning begins. Approval is rewarded. Obedience is praised. Mistakes are punished. Standing out is discouraged. And slowly, a powerful lesson sinks in. It is safer to fit in than to step forward. So people learn to perform instead of express. They learn to please instead of lead. They learn to wait instead of act. By adulthood, this conditioning feels natural. It feels like personality. It feels like just who I am. But it is not who you are. It is what you were trained to become. Imagine for a moment what would happen if you stopped negotiating with fear. If you stopped asking for permission to exist fully. If you stopped shrinking your ambition to make others comfortable. This audiobook will not flatter you. It will challenge you. It will dismantle the internal habits that keep potential dormant, and it will force an uncomfortable but necessary question. What is the real cost of staying the same? Because while fear promises safety, it charges a hidden price. A life of regret. A life of what if. What if? A life of knowing you could have done more but didn't. And here is the truth. Few are willing to say clearly. Your dreams do not require confidence. They require action. Confidence is not a prerequisite. It is a consequence. As we move forward, chapter by chapter, we will confront the behaviors, beliefs, and emotional patterns that quietly sabotage progress, seeking approval, people-pleasing, shyness, inferiority, limiting beliefs, perfectionism, information addiction, waiting for perfect timing, indecision, and the comfort trap. These are not flaws. They are learned defenses, and what is learned can be unlearned. This audiobook is an invitation, not to become someone new, but to stop betraying who you already are, because the life you want is not blocked by fate. It is blocked by hesitation, and hesitation ends here. Welcome to Audiobook Lib, where clarity replaces chaos, discipline builds freedom, and ordinary thinkers become strategic builders. If you are ready to strengthen your mind, expand your perspective, and position yourself for the future, you are exactly where you belong. Chapter 1. Seeking permission to exist. Most people do not realize they are waiting. They wake up each day believing they are choosing their lives, when in reality, they are asking for silent approval from parents, from peers, from society, from strangers who will never live with the consequences of their decisions. This is not accidental. It is learned. From an early age, approval becomes currency. Good behavior is rewarded. Obedience is praised. Conformity is celebrated. And slowly, a dangerous association is formed. I am acceptable when I am approved. So the child learns to scan the room before speaking, to measure reactions before expressing, to ask, even without words, "Is this allowed?" That habit grows into adulthood. Consider how many adults hesitate before acting, not because they lack ability, but because they fear disapproval. They wait for reassurance before starting. They seek validation before believing. They look for someone else to confirm what they already feel inside. This is the silent habit of asking permission to exist fully. Suppose you have an idea that excites you. Before you act, you test it on others. You watch their reactions closely. If they hesitate, you hesitate. If they doubt, you doubt. If they don't understand, you retreat. Your confidence was never weak. It was outsourced. Seeking approval feels safe. It feels responsible. It feels humble. But beneath that surface is a quiet surrender of authority. When you wait for approval, you hand over authorship of your life. You allow external opinions to determine internal conviction. And the problem is not that others disapprove. The problem is that you treat their approval as permission to move. Imagine living your entire life on probation. Every decision reviewed. Every ambition filtered. Every expression moderated. That is not living. That is negotiating survival. Many people mistake approval seeking for kindness. But kindness does not require self-erasure. Humility does not require invisibility. Approval addiction creates a fragile identity, one that collapses the moment applause disappears. And applause always disappears. Here is the uncomfortable truth. If you need permission to act, you will never act boldly. If you need approval to begin, you will always begin late. And if you need validation to believe, you will never fully trust yourself. Look closely at the lives you admire most. They are not free of criticism. They are free of the need for approval. At some point, every meaningful life makes a quiet decision. I will disappoint people. Not out of cruelty, not out of rebellion, but out of integrity. Because you cannot live truthfully and remain universally approved, those two paths never intersect. Approval seeking keeps dreams theoretical. It keeps ideas trapped in journals. It keeps ambition polite and harmless. And society rewards this. It praises those who stay in line. It applauds those who wait their turn. It calls restraint maturity. But growth is rarely polite. It is disruptive. It is misunderstood. And it often begins with disapproval. Imagine what would change if you stopped asking. If you stopped explaining. If you stopped waiting for a green light that was never coming. No one is coming to authorize your potential. No one is appointed to validate your calling. No one else can grant you permission to live fully. That authority was always yours. Approval is a habit, and habits can be broken. The moment you stop asking for permission is the moment your life begins to move forward. Chapter 2. Living in the audience of other people's opinions. Most people are not living their lives. They are performing them. They move, speak, choose, and hesitate as if they are standing on a stage, watched by an invisible audience whose opinions matter more than their own direction. Even when no one is physically present, the crowd is there, in the mind, in the imagination, in the hesitation before action. This is the quiet power of other people's opinions. Consider how early this begins. A raised eyebrow, a laugh, a comment made casually, but remembered permanently. Slowly, a lesson forms. Visibility invites judgment. Judgment brings pain, so the mind adapts. It learns to anticipate reactions before taking action. It rehearses explanations before decisions are even made. It edits ambition to avoid criticism. Suppose you want to try something new. Before you ask yourself, "Do I want this?" you ask something else entirely. What will they say? Will I look foolish? Will I be judged? Will I be laughed at? And just like that, your life is no longer directed from the inside out. It is governed from the outside in. Living this way feels cautious. It feels intelligent. It feels socially aware. But in reality, it is a form of self-censorship. You are not responding to reality. You are responding to imagined reactions. Most people are haunted not by real criticism, but by hypothetical judgment. Conversations that never happened. Opinions that were never spoken. disapproval that exists only in the mind, yet holds real power over behavior. Here is the paradox. The people you fear judging you are usually too busy worrying about being judged themselves. And yet entire lives are shaped around avoiding embarrassment, avoiding misunderstanding, avoiding standing out. Dreams are downsized so they appear reasonable. Goals are softened so they don't provoke questions. This creates a dangerous pattern. You begin to choose what is acceptable instead of what is authentic. You aim to be liked instead of aligned. You prioritize social safety over personal truth. And slowly, without noticing, you become an extra in your own life. Notice how this manifests. You delay sharing ideas. You silence opinions. You abandon paths that feel meaningful but unconventional. Not because they are wrong, but because they are visible. Visibility is threatening when identity is fragile. Living under the weight of others' opinions creates a false sense of control. It feels like prevention, like foresight, like emotional intelligence. But it is actually avoidance. Avoidance of discomfort. Avoidance of vulnerability. Avoidance of the possibility of being misunderstood. Here is the truth few accept. If you are not misunderstood at some point, you are not being honest enough. If you are never criticized, you are not visible enough. And if everyone approves of your choices, they are not yours. Opinion is the tax charged on authenticity. Every meaningful pursuit carries social friction. Growth disrupts expectations. Change unsettles familiarity. And those who stay the same are rarely criticized because they are predictable. But predictability is the price of approval. Imagine living without constantly checking the audience, without narrating your choices to justify them, without shrinking your ambition to avoid commentary. The most dangerous opinions are not the loud ones spoken by others. They are the silent ones you internalize and obey without question. At some point, you must decide, will you live as the main character of your life, or as a performer, adjusting your script to keep the crowd comfortable? Because the audience will change. Opinions will shift. Approval will be inconsistent. But the consequences of your choices will always belong to you. You were not meant to live under review. You were meant to live with intention. And the moment you step off the imaginary stage, your life regains direction. Chapter 3. The polite prison of people-pleasing. There is a kind of prison that has no bars, no guards, no locks. It is built with smiles, agreement, and good intentions. And many people spend their entire lives inside it without ever calling it captivity. This is the prison of people-pleasing. People-pleasers are often praised. They are called kind, considerate, easy to work with, reliable. But beneath that praise is a quiet pattern of self-erasure. Consider how often people say yes when they mean no. How often they stay silent to avoid tension. How often they sacrifice their needs to maintain harmony. On the surface, it looks like generosity, but over time it becomes something else. Resentment. People-pleasing teaches you that conflict is dangerous, that disagreement risks rejection, that asserting yourself threatens belonging. So you adapt. You anticipate others' needs before acknowledging your own. You soften your truth so it doesn't disturb anyone. You become agreeable, even when it costs you direction. Suppose someone asks something of you that drains your energy or pulls you away from your priorities. Your body knows the answer immediately. There is tension, there is resistance, there is clarity. But instead of listening to it, you negotiate with yourself. It's not a big deal. I don't want to disappoint them. I can manage. Maybe later I'll focus on myself. And slowly, later never comes. People-pleasing is not kindness. Kindness does not require self-neglect. It requires honesty. What people-pleasing truly seeks is safety. The safety of being liked. The safety of being needed. The safety of avoiding discomfort. But here is the cost. Every time you abandon yourself to keep peace, you reinforce the belief that your needs are less important. Every unspoken boundary teaches others how to treat you. And every ignored instinct weakens your sense of self-trust. Over time, people-pleasers lose something critical: clarity. They no longer know what they want, only what others expect. Their lives become reactive, shaped by requests, obligations, and external demands rather than internal intention. And yet, they wonder why they feel exhausted, why resentment builds quietly, why fulfillment feels distant. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. You cannot build your dream life while managing everyone else's comfort. People-pleasing turns potential into obligation, ambition into inconvenience, and self-expression into apology. Notice how often people-pleasers explain themselves excessively. They justify boundaries instead of setting them. They seek permission to choose themselves. But boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions. They teach others where you end and they begin. And without them, your life becomes public property. Here is a truth that must be spoken plainly. Discomfort is not danger. Disagreement is not rejection. And saying no does not make you unkind. It makes you honest. Imagine what would change if you stopped managing reactions. If you allowed others to feel disappointment without rushing to fix it. If you trusted that belonging does not require self-sacrifice. Some people will resist this version of you, not because you are wrong, but because they benefited from your silence. And that resistance is not a signal to retreat. It is confirmation that something has shifted. People-pleasing keeps life small. Boundaries give it shape. And the moment you choose honesty over harmony, your life begins to feel like it belongs to you again. Chapter 4. Shyness, invisibility, and the fear of being seen. Many people call themselves shy. They wear it like a personality trait, as if it were something fixed, permanent, and harmless. But shyness is rarely about people. It is about exposure. At its core, shyness is not the fear of others. It is the fear of being seen clearly and judged honestly. It is the instinct to remain unnoticed, to stay in the background where expectations are low and scrutiny is minimal. Consider how invisibility feels safe. When you are not seen, you are not evaluated. When you are not heard, you are not challenged. When you do not step forward, you cannot fail publicly. So the mind learns a quiet strategy. Stay small, stay quiet, stay safe. Suppose you are in a room full of opportunity. You have an idea, a thought, a contribution that could matter. But instead of speaking, you wait. You tell yourself someone else will say it better. You convince yourself it is not important enough. You postpone expression until the moment passes. And later, when someone else voices the same thought and receives recognition, you feel a familiar sting, regret. Shyness is often mistaken for humility. But humility does not hide. It observes, learns, and then acts with intention. What shyness truly protects is the ego from exposure. If no one sees you try, no one sees you fail. If no one hears you speak, no one can reject your voice. But invisibility has a cost. When you repeatedly hide your presence, you teach yourself that your contribution is optional. You begin to believe that your ideas are secondary, your voice is unnecessary, and your presence is expendable. This belief does not stay in social situations. It spreads. It affects how you negotiate, how you ask for opportunities, how you pursue ambition. You start living as if your life is something that happens around you, rather than something you actively shape. Here is the paradox. The fear of being seen often masks a deep desire to be recognized. Shy people do not want to disappear. They want to be accepted without risk. But recognition without risk does not exist. Visibility always comes with vulnerability. Expression always invites judgment. And growth always requires exposure. Imagine treating shyness not as identity, but as conditioning. A learned response to environments where visibility once felt unsafe. Because what is learned can be challenged. Being seen is not a threat. It is a requirement for impact. Every meaningful contribution requires stepping into visibility, allowing others to see your imperfect attempt rather than your perfect silence. The world does not reward hidden potential. It responds to expressed value. Staying invisible may protect you from embarrassment, but it also protects you from progress. It keeps your life hypothetical, full of could have been instead of I tried. Here is a truth worth sitting with. You do not need to be confident to be visible. You need to be willing. Willing to speak before your voice is steady. Willing to act before certainty arrives. Willing to be seen before perfection exists. Invisibility is not humility. It is self-denial. And the moment you allow yourself to be seen, even imperfectly, you begin to reclaim space in your own life. Chapter 5. Feeling small in the presence of others. There is a quiet shrinking that happens inside many people. It occurs in rooms where confidence seems louder, in conversations where others speak with certainty, in moments where comparison silently takes control. Suddenly, you feel smaller, not physically, but internally. Your posture changes, your voice softens, your thoughts hesitate. You begin to doubt your relevance in the presence of others who appear more accomplished, more confident, more advanced. This is not coincidence. It is conditioning. From an early age, people are trained to measure themselves against others. Grades, rankings, titles, achievements. Slowly, worth becomes comparative. Value becomes relative. So when you encounter someone who seems ahead, an automatic calculation begins. They are better. They know more. They belong here more than I do. And without a single word spoken, your confidence retreats. Suppose you walk into an environment where you feel inexperienced. Instead of seeing it as a place to grow, you see it as evidence of inadequacy. You interpret learning as inferiority. You mistake unfamiliarity for failure. This creates a dangerous illusion. You assume that those who appear confident are fundamentally different from you, that they were born with something you lack, that their presence diminishes yours. But confidence is not proof of superiority. It is often proof of repetition. Those who appear comfortable did not start that way. They learned through exposure, mistakes, and persistence. What you are comparing is not ability but mileage. Yet comparison rarely makes that distinction. Feeling small is not about who others are. It is about how you position yourself. When you defer automatically, you reinforce the belief that you are less. When you silence your perspective, you deny your lived experience. When you hesitate to contribute, you deprive the moment of diversity of thought. And the tragedy is this. The very environments that trigger insecurity are often the ones that could accelerate growth. But instead of leaning in, you withdraw. Instead of learning, you self-protect. Instead of engaging, you observe from a distance. This pattern slowly shapes identity. You begin to associate challenge with threat, presence with comparison, growth with exposure to judgment. So you choose familiarity. You choose places where you feel competent. You avoid rooms where you might be the least experienced. And while this protects ego, it caps evolution. Here is a grounding truth. Feeling small does not mean you are small. It means you are standing at the edge of growth. Discomfort is not a signal to retreat. It is evidence that expansion is possible. Imagine reframing the presence of confident people, not as a verdict on your worth, but as proof that the path exists. Someone has walked it. That means it is navigable. Your value does not decrease in the presence of others' strength. It becomes clearer. Every person in the room brings a different perspective, a different history, a different lens. And your absence does not elevate others, it only limits the collective. You do not need to compete for worth. You do not need to diminish yourself to belong. Belonging is not earned by shrinking. It is sustained by contribution. The moment you stop making yourself small, your life begins to occupy the space it was always meant to hold. Chapter 6. Limiting beliefs. The stories that sound like truth. Every person lives inside a story. Not the story they tell others, but the one they repeat silently to themselves. It runs in the background, shaping decisions, filtering possibilities, and defining what feels realistic. This story feels like truth, but often, it is only familiar. Limiting beliefs do not announce themselves as restrictions. They arrive disguised as facts, logic, and realism. I'm not the kind of person who does that. People like me don't succeed in those areas. That's unrealistic for someone with my background. I'm too late, too inexperienced, too ordinary. These beliefs are rarely questioned because they sound responsible. They feel mature. They appear protective. But protection is not the same as truth. Consider where these beliefs come from. A comment made early, a failure that hurt deeply, an environment that rewarded conformity over curiosity. Over time, the mind draws conclusions. This is where I belong. That is for others, not me. And once a belief becomes identity, it becomes self-enforcing. Suppose an opportunity appears. Before you assess the opportunity, the belief speaks first. It filters the possibility before reason ever engages. You don't say no consciously. You simply feel that it's not for you. This is the power of limiting beliefs. They do not block doors. They make you stop seeing them. Limiting beliefs shrink ambition without resistance. They keep dreams hypothetical. They turn desire into fantasy instead of intention. And the most dangerous part? They feel personal. You believe the belief is you, your personality, your nature, your reality. But beliefs are not identity. They are conclusions drawn from incomplete data. A single failure does not define capacity. A difficult beginning does not dictate outcome. A lack of early exposure does not mean lack of potential. Yet the mind prefers certainty, even if that certainty is limiting. Because believing I can't feels safer than risking what if I can. Limiting beliefs provide emotional comfort. They protect you from disappointment, embarrassment, and the vulnerability of trying. But in doing so, they quietly sabotage growth. Notice how these beliefs shape language. I could never do that. I'm just not confident. I've always been this way. The word always is rarely accurate, but it is often convenient. Here is a truth that deserves attention. You have never met the full version of yourself. You have only met yourself under certain conditions, in certain environments, with certain beliefs active. To conclude your limits from those circumstances is to mistake exposure for capacity. Beliefs are not permanent. They are adjustable. But they must be challenged through action, not debate. You cannot think your way out of a limiting belief. You must disprove it through experience. Every time you act in contradiction to a belief, it weakens. Every time you hesitate, it strengthens. Imagine treating beliefs as hypotheses rather than truths, experiments rather than conclusions. The story you tell yourself determines the life you attempt. And the moment you question that story, new possibilities become visible. Your potential is not limited by who you have been. It is revealed by what you are willing to challenge. Chapter 7. Perfectionism. Fear wearing a professional mask. Perfectionism often looks like ambition. It sounds like high standards. It presents itself as discipline and excellence. But beneath the polished surface is something far less noble: fear. Perfectionism is fear dressed in professionalism. It is the need to appear competent before risking exposure. It is the belief that mistakes are unacceptable, and that starting imperfectly is more dangerous than never starting at all. Consider how perfectionism delays action. You wait until you are fully prepared, until conditions are ideal, until your skills feel flawless, until confidence arrives. And while you wait, time passes. Suppose you have a goal that matters deeply to you. Instead of taking a small step forward, you plan extensively. You refine endlessly. You polish details that do not yet matter. This feels productive. It feels responsible. It feels like progress. But nothing moves. Perfectionism creates the illusion of control. It convinces you that if you just prepare enough, you can avoid discomfort, that if you wait long enough you can bypass failure. But growth does not operate on those terms. Every skill is born clumsy. Every beginning is messy. Every meaningful pursuit requires visible imperfection. Perfectionism protects ego, not progress. It says, if I never begin, I never fail. If I delay, I remain potential. If I avoid exposure, I avoid judgment. But potential that is never expressed becomes a burden. It turns into self-criticism, regret, and frustration. Notice how perfectionism reframes fear as virtue. Fear of judgment becomes high standards. Fear of failure becomes waiting for readiness. Fear of criticism becomes being thorough. And society reinforces this. It praises preparedness. It applauds polish. It rewards outcomes, not attempts. So perfectionism feels justified, but here is the cost. While you are refining, others are learning. While you are waiting, others are adjusting. While you are preparing, others are progressing. Perfectionism is not about excellence. Excellence is built through iteration. Perfectionism demands certainty before action, but certainty only comes after action. This creates a permanent loop, one where confidence is always one step away, and starting is always postponed. Here is a reality that must be accepted. You will not feel ready before you act. You will feel ready because you acted. Competence is earned through exposure, not avoidance, And clarity is a byproduct of movement, not planning. Imagine releasing the need to impress and focusing instead on engagement. Allowing yourself to be a beginner, accepting that mistakes are not evidence of inadequacy, but proof of participation. Perfectionism does not make you exceptional. It keeps you invisible. The willingness to start imperfectly is the gateway to mastery, and the moment you trade perfection for progress, your life begins to move again. Chapter 8. Information Overload and the Illusion of Preparation. There is a modern way to avoid action that feels intelligent: learning, reading, watching, researching, consuming endless information. On the surface, it looks like discipline. It looks like growth. It looks like responsibility. But often, it is hesitation in disguise. Information overload is not caused by lack of access. It is caused by fear of starting. Consider how easy it is to stay in learning mode. Knowledge is safe. It asks nothing of you. It does not expose you. It does not test you. It does not require risk. Action does. So the mind finds refuge in preparation. I just need one more book, one more course, one more perspective, one more piece of clarity. And the starting line keeps moving. Suppose you want to change something meaningful in your life. Before you take a step, you convince yourself you need to understand everything first. You gather frameworks. You compare methods. You analyze options. The result? You feel informed but stagnant. Information without application creates the illusion of progress. It satisfies the desire to feel productive while avoiding the discomfort of doing, and the modern world rewards this behavior. Content is endless. Advice is abundant. There is always something new to consume. But clarity does not come from accumulation. It comes from interaction. You do not learn how to swim by reading about water. You do not learn confidence by studying courage. You do not learn direction by absorbing opinions. Learning becomes avoidance when it delays engagement. Here is a critical distinction. Preparation is useful when it supports action. It becomes harmful when it replaces action. Most people are not underinformed. They are underexperienced. They know what to do. They understand the principles. They have heard the advice. What they lack is friction, feedback, real-world correction. Information cannot give you that. Consider how often people say they feel overwhelmed, not because they lack clarity, but because they have too many options and no movement. Too much input, no output. Indecision grows, where information piles up, and the longer you wait, the harder starting feels. The gap between knowledge and action becomes heavy with expectation. Here is the uncomfortable truth. You will never feel fully prepared, and you do not need to be. The first step is not meant to be confident. It is meant to be taken. Action simplifies. Action filters. Action teaches. Most clarity arrives after movement, not before it. Imagine treating information as a tool, not a hiding place. Consuming only what you can immediately apply, choosing progress over certainty. Knowledge is potential energy. Action is kinetic. And potential that is never activated becomes pressure. The moment you shift from consumption to participation, learning becomes alive. It transforms from theory into skill, and your life stops being informed and starts being directed. Chapter 9. The Myth of Perfect Timing. There is a promise people make to themselves that sounds reasonable, patient, and wise. I'll start when the time is right. This sentence has quietly postponed more lives than fear ever admitted to. Perfect timing feels responsible. It feels strategic. It feels mature. But in reality, it is one of the most convincing illusions the mind creates. Consider how not now rarely becomes now. It becomes later, and later becomes someday, and someday quietly disappears. Suppose you are waiting for confidence, or stability, or more money, or fewer responsibilities. You tell yourself that once conditions improve, you will act. That once life settles, you will pursue what matters. That once uncertainty fades, you will begin. But life does not settle. Responsibilities do not decrease. Uncertainty does not disappear. The conditions you are waiting for are not ahead of you. They are created by action. Perfect timing is not a moment in the future. It is a story told to justify delay. The mind prefers this story because it avoids risk. It allows you to feel sensible while staying comfortable. It turns hesitation into planning. But here is the reality. Growth always begins under imperfect conditions. Every meaningful pursuit starts before you feel ready, before resources are ideal, before fear is resolved. Waiting for the right time assumes that readiness precedes action. But readiness is the result of repetition, not reflection. Imagine if confidence came first. No one would ever struggle. No one would ever hesitate. No one would ever doubt. But confidence is built through exposure to uncertainty, to mistakes, to discomfort. Timing does not create courage. Courage creates timing. People who move forward are not immune to fear. They simply refuse to let fear decide when life begins. The myth of perfect timing convinces you that delay is neutral, that waiting costs nothing. But waiting has a price. It costs momentum. It costs belief. It costs urgency. The longer you postpone, the heavier the first step feels. The dream becomes larger in your mind while your confidence quietly erodes, and one day you look back and realize the time you were waiting for has already passed. Here is a truth that must be accepted. There is no season where fear disappears before action. There is only the season where you decide to move anyway. Starting imperfectly today is more powerful than waiting perfectly forever. Timing is not found. It is chosen. And the moment you stop waiting for permission from the future, your life reclaims the present. Chapter 10. Indecision. Death by endless options. Indecision rarely looks like fear. It looks like thinking, analyzing, weighing possibilities. It feels intelligent. It feels careful. It feels responsible. But underneath the endless deliberation is avoidance. Indecision is not the absence of clarity. It is the avoidance of commitment. Consider how many people stay stuck. Not because they lack options, but because they have too many. Every choice appears to close another door. Every decision feels final. So the mind searches for the right option, the one without regret, and while it searches, nothing moves. Suppose you are facing a decision that matters. You list pros and cons. You seek advice. You imagine outcomes. You rehearse consequences. Days pass. Weeks pass. Opportunities expire. Indecision keeps you in control, or so it seems. As long as you don't choose, you can't be wrong. As long as you don't commit, you don't have to own the outcome. But here is the cost. Life continues to move without you. Every decision deferred is a direction chosen by default. Not choosing is still a choice. It is a decision to stay where you are. Indecision protects you from immediate discomfort, but it guarantees long-term stagnation. The mind resists commitment because commitment demands ownership. Once you choose, you are responsible for adapting, correcting, and persisting, and responsibility feels heavy. So indecision masquerades as intelligence. But clarity does not come from endless evaluation. It comes from engagement. You do not discover the right path by thinking about it forever. You discover it by walking and adjusting as you go. Most decisions are not permanent. Most paths are not final. Most mistakes are correctable. But indecision treats every choice as irreversible. It exaggerates risk and minimizes adaptability. Here is a reality worth embracing. Direction matters more than precision. Movement creates feedback. Feedback creates clarity. And clarity refines direction. Imagine choosing not because you are certain, but because you are willing to learn. Allowing experience to teach what analysis never will. Decisive people are not more confident. They are more committed. They trust their ability to respond, not their ability to predict. Indecision keeps life theoretical. Decision turns it practical. And the moment you commit imperfectly, cautiously, but intentionally, your life begins to regain momentum. Chapter 11. The Comfort Trap. When safety becomes the enemy, there is a danger more subtle than fear. Comfort. Comfort does not alarm you. It does not threaten you. It does not demand anything from you. It soothes. It stabilizes. It convinces you that staying where you are is reasonable. And that is precisely why it is dangerous. Comfort creates a familiar rhythm. You know what to expect. You know what is required. You know how to survive within its boundaries. But comfort rarely asks if you are fulfilled. Consider how many people tolerate lives they do not love because they are familiar. Jobs that drain them, routines that numb them, relationships that no longer grow them. They are not miserable enough to change, and not fulfilled enough to feel alive. So they stay. Comfort tells you that discomfort is a warning sign, that struggle means something is wrong, that ease is proof of correctness. But growth does not operate by those rules. Every expansion begins with instability. Every upgrade requires discomfort. Every meaningful shift disrupts equilibrium. The comfort trap convinces you that safety is success, that predictability is progress, that stability without purpose is enough. But comfort slowly erodes ambition. When you are too comfortable, urgency disappears. The edge dulls. The hunger fades. You begin to settle, not because you chose less, but because you stopped questioning more. Suppose you feel a quiet dissatisfaction, not loud enough to force change, but persistent enough to whisper at night. Instead of listening, you distract yourself. You rationalize. It's not that bad. Others have it worse. I should be grateful. Gratitude becomes a silencing tool. But gratitude and growth are not opposites. You can appreciate where you are and still refuse to stay there. Comfort keeps people loyal to familiar suffering. They choose known dissatisfaction over unknown possibility. They accept predictable frustration over uncertain growth. And the longer they stay, the harder leaving feels. Comfort creates inertia. The mind adapts to limits. The body adjusts to confinement. And eventually expansion feels threatening. Here is the truth few confront. Comfort is not the same as peace. And safety is not the same as fulfillment. A life designed only to avoid discomfort becomes a life of quiet regret. Imagine treating discomfort not as an enemy, but as evidence of forward movement, as a sign that something new is forming. The goal is not chaos. It is intentional challenge. Comfort has its place. But when it becomes the goal, it becomes the ceiling. And the moment you stop protecting comfort at all costs, your life begins to grow again. Chapter 12. Responsibility avoidance and the fear of ownership. There is a moment in every life when responsibility must be claimed. Not the responsibility assigned by others, but the responsibility of authorship. The acceptance that your choices, your direction, and your outcomes belong to you. Many people resist this moment, not because they are lazy, but because responsibility feels heavy. Responsibility removes excuses. It strips away the comfort of blame. It demands ownership not only of success but of failure, mistakes, and misjudgment. So the mind looks for escape routes, circumstances, timing, upbringing, the system, other people. These explanations may be true, but they are not empowering. Suppose something in your life is not working. Instead of asking, "What can I do differently?" the mind asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The shift is subtle, but powerful. One question leads to agency. The other leads to stagnation. Responsibility avoidance keeps people passive. It turns them into observers of their own lives, commentating, analyzing, complaining, but rarely intervening. And yet, there is comfort in not owning outcomes. If it is not your fault, it is not your burden. If you did not choose it, you are not accountable for changing it. But here is the trade-off. You cannot avoid responsibility and retain power. Blame feels lighter, but it makes you dependent. Ownership feels heavy, but it makes you free. Avoiding responsibility delays growth. It keeps people waiting for rescue, permission, or external change. It turns life into something that happens to you rather than something you actively shape. Here is the hard truth. No one is coming to take responsibility for your life. No one else will align your days with your values. No one else will protect your potential. No one else will correct your course. Ownership is uncomfortable because it removes illusions. It forces you to face choices you avoided, habits you maintained, and opportunities you declined. But it also restores agency. The moment you say, "This is mine to change," something shifts. Energy returns. Direction emerges. Movement becomes possible. Responsibility is not punishment. It is permission. Permission to act without waiting. Permission to adjust without blame. Permission to build without excuses. Imagine treating responsibility not as a burden, but as leverage, a tool that gives you influence over your future. When you own your decisions, you also own your capacity to change them. And that is where real power begins. Chapter 13. Identity Attachment. This is just who I am. Few phrases are more limiting and more casually accepted than this one. This is just who I am. It sounds honest. It sounds self-aware. It sounds settled. But often, it is a quiet refusal to evolve. Identity attachment occurs when habits are mistaken for personality, when patterns are mistaken for nature, and when past behavior is mistaken for permanent truth. Consider how often people describe themselves in fixed terms. I'm not confident. I'm bad with money. I'm not creative. I'm introverted. I'm just not disciplined. These statements feel descriptive, but they are declarations. And the mind obeys what it declares. When you attach identity to behavior, growth becomes betrayal. Change feels like dishonesty. Improvement feels like pretending to be someone you're not. So you stay consistent, even when consistency costs you your future. Suppose you attempt something new and feel discomfort. Instead of seeing discomfort as growth, you interpret it as misalignment. This doesn't feel like me. I'm forcing it. I should stay true to who I am. But growth never feels familiar at first. If it did, it would not be growth. It would be repetition. Identity attachment creates loyalty to limitation. You defend old patterns not because they serve you, but because they are familiar. The known feels safer than the unknown, even when the known is unsatisfying. Here is the danger. When identity becomes rigid, learning slows, feedback is rejected, adaptation is resisted. You protect your self-image instead of expanding your capacity. But identity is not fixed. It is fluid. You were not born knowing how to speak, think, decide, or lead. You learned, and what was learned can be refined. The version of you that exists today is not the final version. It is a draft shaped by environment, reinforcement, and repetition. Imagine treating identity as a workspace, not a label. Something you actively design instead of passively defend. You are not dishonest for changing. You are not fake for evolving. You are not betraying yourself for growing. You are updating. The most fulfilled people are not the most consistent. They are the most adaptable. They allow new evidence to reshape who they are. They do not cling to outdated definitions of self. When you release the need to remain who you were, you make room for who you can become. And that is not losing yourself. That is reclaiming authorship. Chapter 14. Emotional comfort over truth. The human mind has a quiet preference. Comfort over truth. Familiar feelings over uncomfortable clarity. Soothing explanations over confronting reality. This preference operates silently, shaping choices long before logic enters the conversation. Truth is demanding. It asks for change. It disrupts routines. It exposes responsibility. Comfort asks for nothing. Consider how often discomfort is treated as a warning sign instead of information. Anxiety becomes something to escape rather than understand. Resistance becomes something to avoid rather than examine. So the mind negotiates. This is good enough. I'll deal with it later. I don't need to push myself. It's not that important. These thoughts calm the nervous system. They restore emotional balance. They reduce internal tension. But they also preserve stagnation. Emotional comfort convinces you that peace comes from avoiding difficulty. That relief is the same as resolution. That numbing discomfort is the same as addressing it. It is not. Comfort soothes symptoms. Truth resolves causes. Suppose you feel dissatisfaction with your life. Instead of asking what must change, you distract yourself. Entertainment, busyness, rationalization. You lower expectations instead of raising effort. This works temporarily. But unresolved truth does not disappear. It waits. It resurfaces as restlessness, as frustration, as quiet regret. Choosing comfort over truth creates emotional debt. And like all debt, it compounds over time. The longer you avoid honest self-examination, the harder it becomes. The more comfortable avoidance feels, the more threatening truth appears. But here is the reframe that changes everything. Discomfort is not punishment. It is guidance. It signals misalignment. It highlights unrealized potential. It points toward growth. Emotional pain is not an enemy to be eliminated. It is a message to be interpreted. Truth may feel harsh initially, but it is stabilizing. It provides direction. It creates coherence between what you feel and how you live. Comfort without truth creates numbness. Truth without comfort creates growth. And growth eventually creates a deeper, more durable peace. Imagine responding to discomfort, not by escaping it, but by asking, what is this trying to show me? What am I avoiding? What am I avoiding? What change am I resisting? When you choose truth, you trade short-term relief for long-term alignment. You stop managing emotions and start integrating them. And the life that emerges is not always easy, but it is honest. Chapter 15. The Turning Point. Choosing action over fear. Every realization reaches a moment of decision. Awareness without action is entertainment. Insight without movement is distraction. At some point, understanding must become embodiment. This is that point. Everything you have recognized so far, approval-seeking, fear of judgment, people-pleasing, invisibility, comparison, limiting beliefs, perfectionism, information overload, waiting for timing, indecision, comfort, avoidance of responsibility, rigid identity, emotional avoidance, all of it leads here to a choice. Action is not dramatic. It is often quiet, uncelebrated, uncertain, but it is decisive. Fear does not disappear before action. It diminishes after action. Confidence is not summoned. It is earned. Suppose you take one small step before clarity, before certainty, before approval. That step does something profound. It shifts identity. You stop being someone who plans to act. You become someone who acts. Momentum begins to form. Feedback replaces imagination. Reality replaces fear. Action grounds you in the present. It collapses hypothetical futures into lived experience. And something else happens. Self-trust returns. Not because everything works, but because you learn that you can respond, adapt, and continue. That you are not fragile. That discomfort does not destroy you. You do not need to conquer fear. You need to move alongside it. Fear is not a signal to stop. It is a signal that something meaningful is within reach. Every life that expands does so through imperfect action, through repeated attempts, through learning in motion. The turning point is not when fear ends. It is when obedience to fear ends. The life that responds to the brave. There is a life that responds only to those who move, not those who wait, not those who prepare endlessly, not those who seek permission, but those who act imperfectly, consistently, honestly. You were never lacking potential. You were never missing something essential. You were never behind in the way you feared. You were trained to hesitate, conditioned to doubt, rewarded for staying small. And now you see it. Awareness is not the end. It is the beginning. The life you want does not require a new personality. It requires a new relationship with fear. Fear does not disappear, but it no longer decides. You decide. You decide to speak before confidence arrives, to act before certainty forms, to choose growth over comfort. The cost of action is discomfort. The cost of inaction is regret. One is temporary. The other is permanent. Do not wait for the moment when you feel ready. That moment is created by movement. Start where you are, with what you have, as you are, because the life you dream of is not blocked by fate, luck, or timing. It is waiting on the other side of action. If this audiobook resonated with you, like the video, subscribe for more long-form audiobooks. Share it with someone who needs this message. Welcome to Audiobook Lib, where insight meets action.